this is not a necessarily both sides-ism right now. Right now, Democrats are making ICE agents the target, and they must know it.
Welcome to RealClearPolitics for Wednesday, September 24th. I'm Andrew Walworth, and joining me are RCP President and co-founder Tom Bevan and Washington Bureau Chief Carl Cannon. Well, gentlemen, Jimmy Kimmel returned to the airwaves last night. A lot of people tuned in to see what he would say after his 5-day suspension for remarks he made in the wake of the Charlie Kirk assassination. So let's just start there. Here's part of what he said.
You understand that it was never my intention to make light of the murder of a young man. I posted a message on Instagram on the day he was killed, sending love to his family and asking for compassion, and I meant it, and I still do. Nor was it my intention to blame any specific group for the actions of what it was obviously a deeply disturbed individual. That was really the opposite of the point I was trying to make, but I understand that to some that felt either ill-timed or unclear, or maybe both. And for those who think I did point a finger, I get why you're upset. If the situation was reversed, there's a good chance I'd have felt the same way. I have many friends and family members on the other side who I love and remain close to, even though we don't agree on politics at all. I don't think the murderer who shot Charlie Kirk represents anyone. This was a sick person who believed violence was a solution, and it isn't. Ever. On Sunday, Erica Kirk forgave the man who shot her husband. She forgave him. That is an example we should follow. Yeah. If you believe in the teachings of Jesus, as I do, there it was. That's it.
So, Tom, he talked about the First Amendment. He thanked Ted Cruz and other Republicans for standing up for him. He talked about FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr, and he thanked Disney for putting him back on the air. So what do you make of the night?
I am of two minds about this. On one hand, I think it's good that Jimmy Kimmel came out and offered at least some recognition of the problem, although he didn't actually say the words, "I'm sorry." It was one of those apologies. If you took it the wrong way, I apologize.
If you were dumb enough to misunderstand my...
Right. That sort of classic, half/non-apology. And, I watched it and I thought, particularly as it pertains to the last part about, he's a follower of Jesus Christ and this forgiveness that Erica Kirk showed was so important. And he has all these friends that are on the other side of the political aisle. So where has that grace? Where has that Christian compassion, that forgiveness, where has that been for the last 10 years? Jimmy Kimmel has made fun of MAGA folks. There have been one example that stands out is when he made a joke about people who didn't take the COVID vaccine, pulling the plug on them. Sorry, Wheezy, off you go, that kind of stuff. And so it's tough if you are just a complete dick for 10 years to one side, and then suddenly you're out there preaching forgiveness and compassion. Forgive us. Many of us who look at you and think, wow, this is either, insincere or hypocritical. I suppose better late than never, but still, it doesn't make up for the 10 years where it was not even a part of his thinking or routine. And would he have done this proactively? Would he have done this had he not been taken off the air? I think we all know the answer to that question. It's absolutely not.
Well, like Tom, I had reactions that weren't just one way or the other. The first thing is that I thought when he talked about Charlie Kirk's death and Charlie Kirk's widow, he had perfect pitch. It's not exactly how I would phrase it, but he choked up. He was clearly emotional about it, and I believe that's sincere. And I thought when he talked about the First Amendment, he was on very solid ground. He said what I've been saying. I think all three of us have been saying on this show for the last 3 days, and he, as Tom said, he thanked Ted Cruz, right? And he pointed out the hypocrisy of Brendan Carr, who was for free speech, before he was against it. The whole construct, and President Trump himself. I agreed with every word of that. But there's a but coming, two of them actually. The first is that he never said anything about the censorship when the Biden administration was doing it, and he didn't Monday night. He didn't last night either. He didn't. He ignored all that. They took the sitting president off Twitter, and this after being pushed by Democrats. And so the hypocrisy that he sees in some corner among the president, it's true among these Democrats. It's when the FBI was bullying people. We'll talk about this. I know I don't mean to preempt your direction, Andy. We're going to talk about this later in the show about what's going on with Google. This was an organized effort that actually began in the bureaucracy, in the Department of Justice, in the FBI, while Trump was president the first time, was supercharged during Joe Biden's presidency with encouragement from the White House, with demands from very prominent Democratic senators, people who now they're all pro Jimmy Kimmel, muzzle the right, muzzle not just Donald Trump, Jay Bhattacharya, anybody who went against their narrative on any of the issues. Transgender politics, voting rights, voting integrity, COVID, boom, gone, snuffed out, silenced. And if Kimmel was sincere about this issue, he would have addressed that. Now, maybe he's just new to the fight. Maybe he'll come around. Tom's going to laugh at me thinking this guy's ever good. I'm me
too well, Carl.
Preemptively saying Tom's going to just want to just laugh at me.
I
for
see
that.
Andy's got a little chuckle going.
But the other thing is this, and he doesn't seem to understand this, and I don't think his defenders do, Andy. He said, you're muzzling late night voices. You muzzled Colbert. He talked about all of these people. Well, this late night format was developed by Jack Paar and Johnny Carson. Jay Leno picked up the mantle. It was never supposed to be a partisan screed for an hour every night on all three networks against the Republican Party. And he thinks he has a right to do that. He may have a right to do it, but it begs a larger question: is why all three networks think that that's acceptable, that that's okay. And then when he started talking about politics, he just gives the DNC talking points as if though everybody agrees with him, and maybe most of his audience does agree with him. But it's like watching MSNBC, but it's dressed up as a humor for mass entertainment, and it's a small slice, of it's whatever the Democrats do that day, whatever they're going, poking fun at Republicans, not just MAGA people, the Republican Party, and he doesn't seem to be aware that people have grown tired of this.
Can I add one thing to your
please.
One point to your hypocrisy? I mean, and this people have found this quote and it's been zinging around the internet, but Jimmy Kimmel he spoke out in favor of canceling Roseanne Barr when she said and tweeted something inappropriate. He didn't mention that. So he's been on the wrong side of the free speech issue until 5 days ago. And suddenly
I feel I'm the only, sometimes I think I'm the only consistent person on this issue, but I guess you guys are too. So,
well, I had a couple of thoughts. One was that, and I think I owe Emily Jashinsky, I think, made this point and made it well. The problem with late night television and the problem with Kimmel right now is that it's a business problem. It is supposed to be a mass audience phenomenon. And as you pointed out, it used to be that way. But now these are micro audiences, smaller and smaller. So to gather an audience, what they've decided to do is go and after a micro audience. They've gone over sort of left-wing young viewers. That's so their numbers are down, but their engagement, at least online, is pretty good. The problem is that if you're going to do that, you've got two problems. One, these are public airwaves. So to Carl's point, there is supposed to be some responsibility when it comes to balance. And second, the economic model just doesn't support it long term. I mean, they will all be downsized. They will all be going away, I think, in time, or be doing very different shows just because the finances of the broadcast television have changed. But the other thing I wanted to talk about was the president's response. Now, he tweeted this out or put it out before Kimmel spoke. He said, "I think we're going to test ABC out on this. Let's see how we do. Last time I went after them, they gave me $16 million. This one sounds even more lucrative." Tom, helpful?
Not helpful. And we talked about this yesterday. Look, Trump, we don't want the government making threats and threatening. Now, I think Trump's talking about maybe in his personal capacity, Because I think, isn't that what happened last time with this lawsuit? They paid.
It was a lawsuit against ABC News. George Stephanopoulos had said something about him.
Correct. Yeah. So it was a personal deal, defamation suit against that he won a settlement from. So, but not helpful. And look, there's plenty of hypocrisy to go around on this issue, but free speech, even if you don't like Jimmy Kimmel, and I don't, it was a business decision on the part of ABC News. The government should stay out of it. And if his show can't make it on its own, as Stephen Colbert, was losing $40 million a year. I don't know how much Jimmy Kimmel's losing, but I'm almost certain he's not making money. Then the marketplace of ideas will eventually catch up to him. But for now, I'm interested to see the ratings of last night's show too, and see how many people tuned in to see what he had to say.
By the way, that was the best moment of the night, when Kimmel really was, for briefly, a comedian, and they showed a clip of Donald Trump saying, he has terrible ratings, and then Kimmel came back and said, "Well, thank you, I got great ratings tonight."
Yeah.
But Kimmel also talked about Trump's consistent bullying of the media, individual reporters. Jonathan Karl asked a question the other day. Now, Carl's written 2 books critical of Trump. He covers him from ABC News. He's got a big megaphone, not as big as the president's, but pretty damn big. And I think there's some personal animus there. But he attacks reporters for asking questions. He doesn't even answer the question. Usually the questions are valid. This happened the other day, and his press secretary does the same thing. Just these ad hominem, sliming of very well-respected journalists, and threatening to sue these companies on his own behalf. I think the days of settlement are over. I think Disney, if he sues them, I think they're going to fight it this time.
I don't know what he would sue.
No jury in New York or
Can't
Washington is going to side with Trump anyway. Yeah, and the New York Times is fighting this lawsuit, and the judge sided with the New York Times and wrote this blistering decision, throwing out the lawsuit and basically telling the lawyer to refile it in a professional manner, and saying lawsuits are not used to be used for public relations. I think that the tide is turning here, and I think it's turning against Trump because it's turning in favor of opposition to censorship. I've said, and I said this last year, I don't know if anybody agrees with me. I don't know if you guys agree with me. I think censorship was a hidden issue in the campaign. Trump didn't talk about it much. J.D. Vance did a little bit. I think people were tired of the Democrats censoring people. I think that it seems like the tide's turning against Trump because I think the American people do not want government censorship, and they've made that clear. And when you go against what you've said before, you get called on it.
Guys, 6:30 this morning, Wednesday, a sniper opened fire at a Dallas ICE facility while officers were transferring these detainees. It's been reported that I think 2 detainees are dead, 1 in critical condition. Shooter was found dead from what we believe is a self-inflicted gunshot. It's also been reported that anti-ICE messages were found near the bullet casings from the shooting, including one that had written on it in blue ink, anti-ICE. This is according to FBI Director Kash Patel. ICE is calling it an act of targeted violence. Tom, what do you make of this?
I mean, still early, and it's like we have this sort of fog of war, but clearly it is an act of violence that is politically motivated. I mean, I think that's obvious on its face. And so we'll learn more about who this person was and what their motives were. But again, we have a problem with political violence in this country, and it seems to be accelerating. And we need to figure out how to turn that around and decelerate it. And again, there's this big debate. Oh, is it right wing? Is it left wing? I think certainly the last few episodes have been driven by these folks have been motivated by their sort of left wing politics, but that doesn't mean that won't be right-wing violence in the future or whatever. We have to figure out a way to stop it. It's terrible for the country.
Well, let's do a thought experiment. So suppose we could go back in time to Germany, in the Third Reich in 1938, 1939, 1940, and we'd see these these SS agents knocking on doors in houses all over Europe, wherever the Wehrmacht had conquered, and with their ominous call, Juden hinaus, Jews out. And we know now, and some people knew then, that those people would be loaded on boxcars and sent to their death, men, women, and children, civilians, every one of them, at an extermination camp. Would we want to shoot those Gestapo agents? Yeah, we would. These Democrats who routinely compare ICE to the Gestapo, routinely use that analogy, should knock it off. Jimmy Kimmel said, we started the show talking about Jimmy Kimmel, and other people have pointed out, if you use this rhetoric, there's always going to be a deranged person to do this. Now, these people who do these acts of political violence, they may be politically motivated. They're also mentally unstable. But have we created an environment with all this rhetoric where we make it too easy for these people? We're encouraging people without meaning to. And that's what Democrats, I think, should talk to themselves about when the way they talk about ICE. And I'm talking about J.B. Pritzker and the mayor of Chicago and all these other leading Democrats. This is not a necessarily both sides-ism right now. Right now, Democrats are making ICE agents the target, and they must know it.
Yeah. It was interesting this morning because I think the victims were not ICE agents, but were these detainees, the people who actually were shot. There was a criticism of people who jumped to the conclusion that it was an anti-ICE. Kristi Noem wrote on X. She said, "While we don't know the motive yet, we know that our ICE law enforcement is facing unprecedented violence against them. It must stop." She was attacked for saying that, even though her first sentence is, "We don't know what the motive is, but we know that there have been other attacks, and it's terrible." It just seems to me that, again, this was coming from the left, that there was sort of a feeling that that until we sort of locked down what the source of the violence was, you couldn't say anything to defend ICE or.
Well, that's absurd, and she's right. I mean, there have been the left has been very over the top in their rhetoric against ICE agents, and I think it has led to increased number of attacks on them. We've had what's it called, Operation something Midway here in Chicago, out in Broadview. They've got an ICE depot where there've been protests outside and the like every single day, and harassing the agents as they're trying to do their job, and which is enforce federal law. But I do want to say the rhetoric, Gavin Newsom was just on last night. I have to mention him so that everybody who's watching can take a sip of their favorite beverage. But he said, and this is not specific to this case, but just the rhetoric writ large, he said in this very, sort of direct, convincing way, he said, "I believe that we will not have an election in 2028. I believe it with the core of my being. This is a code red moment. People have to understand that, and they've got to get up and fight." If you are convincing your supporters that if they don't do something, there will not be an election in 2028 and our democracy as we know it will be over, what are you actually telling them? What are you giving them license to use whatever means necessary to prevent that from happening? Are you excusing? I think
Thomas Jefferson would say yes, Tom.
Anybody who's objective would say yes. And it certainly, if a Republican governor was out there saying this kind of stuff, Gavin Newsom would be screaming at the top of his lungs about how, they're inciting violence.
Right. But I had said a moment ago that this is not both sides-ism, but I want to retract that because that's not right. I'm talking about this. Tom's making a broader point, but the way Democrats talk about ICE makes ICE agents targeted. And this environment almost makes these attacks inevitable. But the way you could argue, and I will make the argument, that the way some conservatives have been talking about the CDC and the CDC also had an attack like this one, where a gunman showed up, somebody was killed, and so I think the Republicans need to also, and the conservatives also, pay attention to how they talk about an agency, the CDC in specific, but other federal agencies. If we're going to start. We've got, I don't know,
Republicans were out
John Locke could say
CDC,
we had 200.
calling CDC employees, Gestapo agents and domestic terrorists?
It's not, look, it's not perfectly equivalent, Tom, but they said the
Okay.
agency was corrupt. They said the agency, lied to you. They said,
They say that about all the agencies, Carl.
I'm just making the point that if this is a
I
time,
don't know that there's an
this is a
equivalency
time
there, honestly.
we're arguing for free speech, but we're also at the same time, and Andy talked about this tension yesterday. We're also talking about, but we need to be more careful at the same time. Free speech does not, exercising your free speech does not necessitate you demonizing the other side. Good free speech probably means the opposite of that. It means you're temperate. If you're asking people to listen to you, you're not going to call them murderers and communists and Nazis, because that's not really a conversation, is it?
Once again, Charlie Kirk.
You're listening to Real Clear Politics. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm with Carl and Tom. We're on YouTube. We're on the app. So if you like what you're hearing, subscribe, and we'll be back right after this. Guys, the House Judiciary Committee announced yesterday on Tuesday that Google, this is the quote, Google commits to offer all creators previously kicked off YouTube due to political speech violations on topics such as COVID-19 and elections an opportunity to return to the platform. Is free speech having a good week here, Carl? This is the second story we're doing about it today.
Yes, it is, and I think it's a good thing. I just, the idea that you would deplatform a president, a professor like Jay Bhattacharya, who now runs the NIH, all of these and these random conservative voices who the FBI, some ex FBI agent had this bizarre thing, this algorithm that he said it was, stuff was coming from Russia. Do you remember that thing, Tom, what it was called? A platform. Matt Taibbi blew the whistle on it, kicking Americans off Google and YouTube and Instagram and Twitter on the grounds that they were Russian bots. And these people, somebody finally started interviewing them. They never met a Russian in their life. They don't even like Russia. This is long overdue, in my view. And I think the First Amendment is making a comeback. I hope that it's not making a comeback because somehow there's this jujitsu thing where it's being used against Trump, like I talked about in the first segment. I hope Americans have just come to I hope these elites have come to the realization that they need to stop silencing people and unless now the exception, I don't mean to sound like Pam Bondi, but hate speech and calls for violence or difference, but that's a different category. But differences of opinion on public policy, to deplatform people over that, it was always problematic. And I wonder if this is going to be the end of it, or if they can be asked, I'm queuing up Tom Bevan here, if they're going to be asked to make amends for some of the harm that they caused.
I want to get to the amends in just a second, Tom, but I do want to ask Tom this. Do you think any of this would have happened if Trump hadn't won the election? Is this all just, there's one thing I think the tech companies have no moral compass whatsoever. And I'm not saying that maybe they shouldn't. Maybe they should really just be companies.
Can you say that about Google, Andy? Their motto was "Do no evil."
Well, but my question.
Don't be evil.
Don't be evil. Okay.
My question is this just sort of leaning, going with the political winds?
So that is a great question, actually, and one that I think we should be talked about and considered because, my opinion on that is that no. These companies, this would not be happening if Trump didn't win. I think Trump's election was a hinge moment for free speech. I really do. And because of the way that the Biden administration had proceeded and we now know had used the heavy hand of government against people who were their political opponents or people who they thought were saying things that were irresponsible or, had a different opinion than them, I think the censorship complex would have continued to flourish and we would not have seen a comeback on free speech. And, Brendan Carr, up until 7 days ago, had been a real breath of fresh air in terms of, talking openly about restoring and fighting for free speech. It is something that needs to be promoted and protected. That's something that we at Real Clear Politics have been doing for the last 25 years since we started, but most certainly over the last 5 or 7 years, we've been sort of at the center of this battle over free speech. We have been deplatformed. We have been throttled and silenced for simply running pieces from the left and the right on different subjects, whether it's, and a lot of this stuff centered around COVID, lab leak theory, efficacy of masks, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, all of these issues where there were different points of view, but one set of viewpoints was declared off limits by the public health establishment, by the Biden administration, et cetera. And so I do think the good news is I do think this is a result of free speech has made a comeback. I do think it was a result of Trump's election. The bad news is, and this is when I go into my Eeyore mode, I do not think any of the people who were responsible for the censorship in the first place, including journalists, media personalities, and the like, would act any differently if we find ourselves in the same situation. I honestly, I don't know that there has been any introspection, no lessons learned, no reformation, nothing. And so if we find ourselves in that position again, I believe, and I hope I'm wrong, but I believe that these folks would all do the same thing. They would look to ostracize and kick out people who had a different point of view. They look to silence them and destroy them, basically.
Well, the New York Times has still never apologized to us for running an attack piece on Real Clear Politics for daring to include polls that showed that Trump might win the election. He won the election.
Well, part of my opinion is based on our own personal experience with these folks, and we know how they operate. And there is never any apology. It's just moving right on to the next thing, and there's no accountability. I mean, who's holding any of these people accountable? It's Jake Tapper was just on Colbert or somebody last night and said that this Jimmy Kimmel, this was the worst direct attack on free speech he's ever seen in his lifetime. It's like, dude, where have you been for the last 5 years? I mean, are you kidding me? So no, they will do the same thing, unfortunately. And it's like a fungus that continues to grow. You can stamp it out. You can beat it back. But if you're not vigilant about it, it will grow right back.
Well, let's go to Carl's question. Reparations. Reparations due to people who have been who were kicked off these platforms because it had a material impact.
Yeah, or in other things they did, stifling advertising, doing things to organizations. Reason Magazine, Libertarian, Reason Magazine, Real Clear Politics, right down the middle, but also includes conservative stuff that they had banned, conservative publications like the Federalist and National Review. Are these people? Did Google and these other platforms do things, Tom, that cost us money? I think the answer is yes. And these fake, these phony misinformation organizations that sprung up, and we're getting government money, but we found out later. Yeah,
from the U.S. State Department.
Yeah,
among others.
What's the recourse here? If any?
Well, look, I've seen online some people suggesting there should be a class action lawsuit against Google, that they should be after what they engaged in, they just admitted they were wrong. Is that it? They just, sorry, we're wrong. We promise we won't do it again, and that's it. That there's
we violated your constitutional rights for 5 years, but oops.
Yeah, exactly. Like, shouldn't there be some sort of accountability and restitution for the wrongs that they committed? I would argue there should.
One of the other things that they was in this announcement from the Judiciary Committee was that they are no longer going to use third-party fact checkers, which I was sort of surprised they were still using them. Tom, what'd you make of that part of the story?
Fact checking was, the idea, right, was that these folks, these objective, non-biased individuals would look at these statements and make evaluations about how true they were and not. Sounds good in theory, but in practice, obviously, it depends on where the fact checkers are sitting ideologically, politically. And what we found out very quickly was pretty much, as is true with most of the media, I would say almost all, if not all of them, were on the left. And so they repeatedly fact checked Republicans more than Democrats. They gave, Republicans worse rating than Democrats on the things that they said. They fact check
humor columns.
Yeah, in some cases they went out of their way to exonerate Democrats from things and say that, well, put in context, this wasn't really a lie, and do the exact opposite to Republicans. So it became pretty clear early on that fact checking was deeply politicized and therefore not really valuable, in some ways detrimental to try to figure out exactly what the facts are. The other thing I would say too about it is, fact checking is a relatively new phenomenon, and it partially, I don't want to say completely, but presupposes the ignorance of the audience, that people are too stupid to figure out what the facts are on their own, and therefore they need to be told what the facts are by some esteemed journalist, right? Who knows the facts.
I'm going to push back on that. The average American voter doesn't have time. If you're I wrote a piece on Bill Clinton when he was president, basically saying he told so many exaggerations that if you were covering him, you were torn between covering the story and the speech he gave and then spending all your time fact checking the stuff. Bill Clinton was so much more accurate than Donald Trump. I mean, Trump says things in passing and he stretches the form of daily journalism. Susan Crabtree, one of our political writers, covered the Charlie Kirk funeral on Sunday. Donald Trump spoke. But there was a lot in that speech, and she wrote about it. And there was this tension that we talked about between the grace that Erica Kirk showed and the desire for vengeance that Donald Trump showed. And Trump himself talked about it in an interesting way. But in passing, he said, I got more young votes than any Republican. They used to get 4% of the votes. I got a majority. This was ludicrous. Ronald Reagan and Richard Nixon got between 50 and 60% of the young vote. And nobody ever got 4%. He was confusing the African-American vote with it was a riff that really lent itself to fact checking. Say, no, Donald Trump, what he said was wrong. He's mistaken. And I still think fact checking has a place. I don't disagree with you that it was corrupted by the bias, really, the consistent bias across all 3 or 4 different news organizations, 2 or 3 nonprofits. They all seem to come out the same place. It was weird. Maybe it wasn't weird. Maybe it's logical because they don't hire any conservatives. But I still think that fact checking has a role, and I think we're losing something if we don't think that journalists still ought to be objective and be able to fact check things. I think journalists ought to be trained, the way I train our young people, to put aside their feelings about somebody and just point out when a president or a senator says something that's wrong. I think facts do matter, and I think that there are such things as objective truths. So I think we may be throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Tom, I can see. I'm going to give you a minute to respond.
You're going to get no. Andy, I'm sure our listeners don't want to hear another rant from me on this. I already said my piece. What about you? I mean, where do you come down on this? You're a discerning news consumer.
I'm against fact checking. I'm for sort of group sourcing comments and that sort of thing, the way they're doing it on Twitter now. But no, I think, look, obviously journalists should try to be objective, and journalists should try to figure out what the objective facts are. There are certain things that aren't sort of black and white. And when they aren't black and white, I think a reporter either should allow for that to the reader, or admit that it's a gray area. And I think that too much of what it has become fact checking is not about the facts per se, but about how those facts have been marshaled. And I'll take a perfect example of that is global warming. Every time you hear a reporter on CNN talk about something about global warming, they will always say, well, the scientific consensus is, and then they give sort of the standard thing. I'm not sure that's helpful. So I guess I'd leave it there. I don't know if that answers your question, Tom, but
yesterday on CNN, when Trump spoke at the UN yesterday, that when his speech was done, they went to CNN. The CNN anchorwoman just said, global warming is a fact. Like Trump's full of shit. The sort of clearing of the throat. Yeah, that's not what I'm talking about.
Right. Yeah.
I've got a question for Carl, but I'm sure we have to take a break, so maybe we can get to it.
Oh, no, this is the great thing about the show. When we do it for YouTube and for the apps, we can talk.
We can go as long as we want. We can talk
as little as we want. Yeah.
Liberation Wednesday.
Yeah.
All right, good. Well, like or subscribe. So, Carl, I've been mulling this for a while, and I'm interested. And we haven't talked about this previously, so this is the first time I'm going to pose this question to you. And it's
sandbag me like an FBI agent.
I'm not going to sandbag you, but it does fit in with the discussion that we were just kind of talking about. And this is it's a sensitive topic and sensitive take. But one of the reasons I think that news is so unobjective these days, is so partisan and so narrative driven, is that you have people, you have reporters you have African American reporters hired to cover the African American community. You have LGBTQ. Everyone's hiring these LGBTQ reporters to cover the LGBTQ community. You have, gay journalists covering the gay community. You have all these different identities that they're covering these different communities, but clearly with a bias, right? Should we even expect a journalist who is, African American to not be sympathetic to issues of race in this country and want to have and write in a sort of narrative fashion? I remember at one point during, I think it was the George W. Bush campaign, there were an inordinate number of political reporters on that campaign that were gay. And one of the issues, a number of folks from the New York Times, and one of the issues that was one of the main issues in that campaign was gay marriage. And it's like, is that appropriate, or do we want that, or do we not want that? That's the question.
I've got an answer to that. I think this idea of hiring people based on their racial identity or their gender, orientation, and then assigning them to cover that movement, or a strong environmentalist, and a person in their private life, drives I would have said Tesla, but and then they're going to cover global warming.
And you expect them to do it objectively.
That's agenda-driven reporting, and it's almost sort of you're setting up the people to do it that way. I don't think that's the right model. I expect people to be able to cover these issues fairly, and some people do. But it would help to have newsrooms that better reflected, the country as a whole. And this is not a new problem, Tom. In 1992, Bill Clinton ran for president. Gay marriage was just starting as an issue. It was gays in the military was the sort of the issue du jour, but it was about broader gay rights. I don't think Clinton had ever. I talked to him about this in 91. I don't think he ever thought about gay marriage, but he was starting to by 92. And
he and his wife opposed gay marriage, right?
Well, the point was it was a new cutting edge thing, and we can do a whole thing on that. But I'm making a different point. So he talked about gays in the military, and that was like for the left,
the way don't end it, right?
The way partial birth abortion was for the right. It was they seized on something that. What kind of bigot wouldn't, if somebody loves this country so much they're willing to die for it, but you won't let them serve in uniform because they're gay? It was a good way to introduce the issue to Americans. And Clinton talked about it in the campaign, but only like to gay audiences late at night. There's no social media then. He's talking to gay fundraisers. He's not really talking about it, but finally it comes out in the open after he's elected while he's president. And I wrote a piece about this at the time for a journalism magazine. In that briefing room, and these were my friends, I covered the campaign with them. There were 9 or 10 out of 50 or 60 regulars. I don't know the percentage, but 9 or 10 openly gay people, and probably some other people who weren't out yet. But there were no veterans of the United States military. And George Condon, who wasn't covering the war, who we've had on the show before, who did serve in the Army. George wasn't assigned to the White House full time, and he noticed this, and we talked about it. The point was that nobody in that newsroom understood this would even be a controversy. But if they'd had some veterans of the military, they would have said, okay, here's why this is, and eventually Clinton won on this issue. Gay rights it's been a great victory, in my opinion. Good. I had opinions about it. I could cover it straight. I could cover it fairly. So there's two different conversations here. One, as I expect, we should have newsrooms that aren't just all liberals. That would help.
Right.
The second part is I expect people who have private views to be able to put those aside and still write about things fairly. We've got reporters who do it. Phil Wegman does it. And I think we should go back to some of the old models of how you train journalists. Do the facts, represent both sides of the story. It's not that hard to do once you set out to do it. And don't see yourself as a crusader who wants to your coverage to result in change, social change, that's not journalism. That's advocacy.
Well, I mean, this is, of course, why I hate.
We've gone far afield, haven't we, Andy?
Well, no, it's just, but it's why I hate identity politics, because I think the assumption too often is that if you are gay or straight or whatever, that will color your view of things because that your identity is so important that you can't be objective about it. And I just reject that because I think that pigeonholes.
You know who also rejected that, Andy? Charlie Kirk.
Yeah,
and
no.
There's this great clip on YouTube of him standing up to a very right-wing anti-gay activist.
Yeah,
so he said what you just said, Andy.
But anyway, my point is that I would hope, to your point, Carl, that people who are working as trained journalists would put their identities aside and report the news fairly. And I would hope that readers would not assume that just because they're reading something by a reporter who is gay or a person of color, that they should sort of discount what they say because of their quote identity. Carl, MSNBC reported over the weekend that White House border czar Tom Homan has been taped accepting a bag of $50,000 cash from undercover federal agents. Homan said on Monday night on the Laura Ingraham show on Fox that he, quote, did nothing criminal, nothing illegal. He didn't actually confirm or deny whether he took the money. Now, Jamie Raskin of the House Judiciary Committee wants to see that tape or hear that tape. I'm not sure whether it's a video or audio tape. Carl, this does have the feel of a good old-fashioned Washington scandal. You have FBI agents posing as contractors to meet with Homan. Do you think we'll ever see that tape or hear that tape? And how much trouble do you think Homan is in?
Well, I'm with Jamie Raskin. Not only do I want Jamie Raskin to see the tape, I want to see the tape. The Justice Department under Pam Bondi has decided this was not a criminal act. I'm not a prosecutor. I'm not a lawyer. The bar for federal bribery is high, and it's gotten higher in the last 15 years. The Supreme Court seems to want the public officials to have to promise a specific quid pro quo and see the money sticking out of their pockets. but this may approach that. For Homan not to deny it was pretty damning, I thought. Laura Ingraham asked him, did you take the money? He said, well, I didn't commit a crime. Well, the Justice Department has ruled that Trump's Justice Department, with this guy he's part of the government. So his team has decided he didn't commit a crime. Jamie Raskin's not so sure. I'm not so sure either. I want to see the tape. And I'll tell you this, even if it is technically not a crime, to have a guy, he was previously in the government. He was going around in 2023 and 2024 saying that he would rejoin the Trump administration if Trump won. So he's a future government employee, promising to help with immigration or whatever it was that he was doing or alleged to have done, and then taking bags of cash. The best thing you can say about it is that it's sleazy.
Tom, do you believe the story?
Well, I don't disbelieve it. I want more information. I'll tell you what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to take the word of Ken Dilanian at MSNBC as the gospel. I mean, we've watched that movie too many times and found out that, the facts are wrong or it was a hoax or whatever. So I agree with Carl. I mean, listen, Caroline Leavitt was asked about this the other day and said, get your facts right. He didn't, she said he never took the money.
Yeah,
he didn't say that. She said it.
She said he never took the $50,000.
Yeah,
something
exactly.
he never said in his own behalf.
Exactly. But so I guess my point is I'm open to the idea that Tom Homan, may have done something unethical / illegal. Okay, that's possible, totally possible. There's also this entrapment angle, which is like, again, knowing the Biden administration, knowing what they did to Mike Flynn, this idea that federal agents are coming in and like trying to, basically entrap somebody. That worries me a little bit too. I want to know more about that. So I'm open-minded to the idea that Homan did something wrong and potentially should be, punished for that. But at the same time, I'm not willing to just, and this is the unfortunate part, the media has disgraced itself so badly over the last 10 years with the Russia hoax and all these other things that I'm just not willing to take at face value, this story from MSNBC. I want more. I need more before I'm going to pass judgment on this.
Yeah, I hear you on that. At the same time, Jamie Raskin does say that there are 6 sources for this story. So
that's what it said in the article, and that's, but how many sources do we have on Russiagate? And I mean, it's just, is it that hard to get a handful of sources to if you're trying to take somebody out?
I think the question is what's on the tape. And like I said, I should have said,
I agree.
We don't know if it's video or audio. That I think is sort of unclear at this point. But nonetheless, and I assume it'd be video because this is the 21st century after all. But
speaking of video, if you're watching us on our podcast, please, like us on YouTube, subscribe to our YouTube channel. The Jimmy Kimmel, by the way, he had 2 funny moments. I mentioned one, the first thing. The other one where he said it with mock seriousness that Disney had him back on the show, but they insisted he had to read this one statement. He pulled a thing out of his paper, folded like it was the lawyers making him apologize or something, and said, if you want to resubscribe to your Disney app, here's how you do it. I like that. So I'm going to borrow that from Jimmy Kimmel. If you like this show, we're not doing Sirius XM on Wednesdays anymore, but we're still doing the show. We're doing it on YouTube. So please like and subscribe.
And then we're on the apps as well. So you can listen to it on all the apps. But anyway, I guess my question is, will we ever see the tape? Let's leave it at that.
My prediction is yes.
Tom?
I hope so.
All right. Well, guys, we're going to leave it there. You're listening to Real Clear Politics. I am Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Carl and Tom. We'll be back tomorrow, Thursday, and we will be on Sirius XM as well. So hope to see you wherever you watch the show. Have a great evening.